Welcome everybody to Something to Talk About at the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. We have a whole bunch of programs that come up during the week, and we're very grateful for Suzanne Granstrom for joining us again today. Ann and Suzanne will be talking in just a minute, but I want to also thank Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island, which is a sponsor of Something to Talk About. They offer day stay respite programs, and they also have affordable or have memory care up on Rolling Bay. They are building an affordable housing and independent living project out there, and they would be glad to give you a tour. Call 360-689-4314 and schedule a tour. And also, I don't want to start without formally acknowledging our friends, the Suquamish, the people of the clear salt water. They have been stewards of our land for time immemorial, and we are latecomers who benefit from their wisdom, and we welcome their hospitality. We are very grateful for it. And with that, I will turn over the discussion about sweet treats for Valentines to Ann and Suzanne.
So thank you, Reed, and welcome, Suzanne. This is just awesome that you're able to have another conversation with us, and I'm very grateful. I'm really looking forward to this conversation about how we can have wholesome, healthy treats and do special kinds of meals that really express love for our loved ones better than maybe like the turf and surf stuff that we often do. Sorry. So what would you like to tell us? How would you like to start us off?
Oh, well, thank you very much, Ann. Thank you to Reed, and also thank you to Fieldstone. I actually live right across the street from Fieldstone. So I've had several tours of the facility over the years. They were working on it, and it is a beautiful spot. It really is. So.
Well, you know, it has a great history too, that building, which is kind of fun. I've always itched to go over there and start making some gardens full of herbs and pollinator plants and things like that.
Yeah, well, eventually there'll be a space for that, but there's still a lot of construction going on, so probably not the time for that. So I'm really happy to be here again. Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to sharing with this, especially with this group of all people I'm familiar with, it looks like. I'm pretty new to the senior center. Is there anybody else online besides Beth and David and Chris?
Yeah, Barbara is.
I haven't seen Barbara. I don't see her. Oh, there you are. Hi, Barbara. Nice to meet you. Good. I'm hoping this could be a little bit interactive today, Ann, if we can do that.
Sure.
And do you want me to just start or do you want to do a little more discussion?
Well, you know, I think, yeah, we had a great conversation about this earlier this week. And I think we're both really interested in making wholesome, delicious food, which I think a lot of people are really interested in eating. So, yeah, I mean, but I think one of the pieces that a lot of people are intrigued about is the idea that I think when you think of wholesome, healthy food, people start going, oh, that's so granola. Or sort of think, well, it can't possibly be as yummy as something indulgent. And I think one of the interesting pieces is as you shift your diet, you do kind of start to feel like what's delicious changes, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think so.
Yeah. You know, it seems, I remember a few years ago, I don't think I would have ever said that I would crave kale. Well, quite a few years ago, but yeah, I mean, because I love kale, but I realize for many people that just sounds weird, right? Or wanting to have something fresh at every meal becomes really a deep desire, not just oh, I better check the box, right?
Right. Oh, I agree completely. Absolutely.
And isn't that some of that is kind of, to me, that's kind of a piece of epigenetics in a way that you're training your body and your being to want the things that are actually, good for you.
Right. I think,
or listening to your body, right?
There you go. I think your body's training you. Once you give it a chance, it tells you what it needs, and it's training you that these things keep us healthy and they taste delicious. But I think in my response to what you're saying and my feeling over time is once I began to really eliminate sugar from my diet and white flour and some of the other foods that are so toxic to our bodies, I felt the same way. And it wasn't just kale. I'm amazed that I actually crave collard greens now and a lot of the more complex greens. So I think once we give our bodies a chance to kind of heal from some of the abuses of food and our misguided choices, the body really tells us what it needs, and we do begin to really want something else.
Well, and sometimes very specific something else's, which I find fascinating. I know that for many people, there's a lot of comfort food is often actually some of the worst stuff, technically speaking. And yet we've trained ourselves not just to think of it that way, but we've also trained our bodies to kind of respond to it that way to some extent, right? I see that very much, like my grandkids coming up, we try to talk about how instead of self-soothing with food, you might self-soothe. We've been putting like little bowls of beautiful polished stones. And instead of having a snack bowl, they have the polished stone bowl with all these yummy, beautiful stones in it, right? And that's like of course, I always have one in my pocket. I don't know if you can see how pretty that is.
It is
That has a
pretty.
thumb spot. It's like rather than a snack, you want to self-soothe with something maybe physical, an action, and something beautiful that you can look at and appreciate. But teaching yourself that in your 70s is a little more challenging sometimes than when you're 7, right?
Absolutely. I think that's really true. And I also think that once we shift our thinking a little bit, um, thinking about why do I need self-soothing now? That's hard to say quickly. And really giving ourselves what we need. And it may be, I just want a warm cup of tea and a little quiet somewhere. For me, that's often the case, or just a little time with my knitting, or I actually need to lay down for half an hour. I need to rest, or I need to get outside and walk. And I think once we begin to think in that way of how am I taking care of myself, those things may, for me, pop up more often. And I think that's probably true for most of us. When we begin to understand what is it I really need here, instead of that knee-jerk reaction, I want a sweet. So
Oh, Suzanne, that is such a great point because I've noticed for myself as I'm trying to sort of ooze into retirement, I have such a hard time because I'm so purpose driven that I feel like if I'm not doing something and I can't check off my list of what I've done, I feel like I left my purse somewhere, that unfulfilled, like, oh my
right.
God, it's ungrounded in some way. And in learning to rest is a huge challenge for some of us.
I think it is, but I think it's something that we can focus more on, and we deserve to give ourselves. And I don't know if you know about my history, and I'm sure some of the people in the audience don't. But for 20 years, I facilitated quit smoking programs in California, and one of the phrases that I learned somewhere along the way was, are you hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? Which is used in all kinds of addiction groups. But it's really useful because it does remind us, what do I really want here? And I deserve to have this. And it might be at some time it's a food, but more often it's something else. I need to lay down. I need to talk to a friend, maybe. But I understand what you say. You're saying we are driven. We are driven to check things off our list. And certainly I can be as busy as the next person, but I'm really trying to recognize what is it I need today and give it to myself when I can.
I think that's exactly what a lot of us are trying to do, working toward. And it's actually amazing to me that it takes practice, but it really does, like so many things. And some of the habits we have really entrenched in our lives are decades old. Maybe even in my case, some of them are literally 70 years old or 65 years old. And so gently, I don't think of it as uprooting anymore. I think about sort of training myself to shift. Like, letting go can be so hard that it just makes you like can tell you so many people who said, yeah, the minute I start thinking about doing a diet, I go out and I eat a pint of ice cream or something like that. It kind of cracks you up and it's funny, but it's also a symptom of our whole being wants equilibrium and we don't want to give it up. Right.
Right.
And it's like,
Absolutely.
oh, you're asking me to move. I don't know about that.
Well, I think
Yeah.
the same thing happens for me taking a walk, because it isn't a habit yet. I'm trying very hard, but sometimes I just don't find time or the weather doesn't agree with me. And that is that equilibrium piece for sure. Yeah, absolutely. But I do think there are lots of ways that we can treat ourselves when we're talking about food and treat the people we care about that also will help them be healthy and that they'll enjoy. Instead of kind of sabotaging their health on Valentine's Day, no matter how hard people try, then all of a sudden there's a cake or cookies as a treat. There's some wonderful options. So maybe we can talk about that a bit.
Yeah, you and I had talked earlier about putting together a menu, and I kind of did that, and I'm sure you kind of did that too. So I thought maybe we could sort of go through comparing, like, we talked about what if you want to start with a glass of wine, or could you maybe do a spritzer or a vinegar shrub instead? What would that look like? Right. And I think a lot of people know about wine spritzers where you could do like 3 parts of a fruity white wine to 1 part sparkling water, and maybe you add a twist of orange or a little lime peel. That's kind of a wine spritzer, but you can do a vinegar shrub too, using apple cider, another fruity kind of vinegar diluted. When there are ways to make fruit vinegars without sugar too. But diluting that like 1 to 3, 1 part vinegar and 3 parts sparkling water, add some fresh ginger juice or a dash of bitters. And they're used in cocktails and stuff like that. And I make, my favorite is nectarine vanilla bean vinegar that I make every summer. And I mean, my grandkids like drink it, but plum, raspberry, all these different kinds. And you can have that as your sort of in your fridge as a stock to use to play with. And they can go in salad dressings, they can go in, sauces, all kinds of things, right? But what would you say for like a starter cocktail or a glass of wine or whatever?
Well, I would say a glass of wine is fine for people too, if they're inclined. And when I do have a glass of wine, which isn't very often, but when I do, I like an organic wine and I prefer red wine. But I also think your shrubs sound really interesting, and maybe we'll have to have a whole nother session to talk about the varieties of vinegar and how healthy vinegar is for us. So I was thinking appetizer, and I had an idea that I thought would be interesting for a healthy appetizer. One of the things, if we venture into the world of the microbiome, the microbiome needs fiber, and it needs a lot of a variety of fiber. And so one thing I want to say about that is most of the menu that I'm talking about, among other things, it's high in vitamins and minerals, high in phytonutrients, and also high in fiber. But for people who aren't eating a lot of fiber now, and you're going to be talking about adding more, take it slow. Don't jump in too fast, because that can cause some repercussions that will kind of make you want to stop for a while and a little worried about the fiber. So I guess I don't have to go into any detail about that, but
Right.
yeah,
I think we got it.
you got it. Yeah.
So what kind of appetizers would you suggest?
Well, what I was thinking about is just some seeded crackers or any kind of cracker that doesn't have sugar added. And that would require you to really, or white flour, that would require you to do some looking. I have been gluten-free for over a year now, so I also try to avoid gluten. So I really love the Mary's crackers. They're all seeds, and seeds are one of the foods that are just so good for us. They have good oils in them and lots of fiber. And Mary's crackers, take a look at the box, even with Mary's, because I think there's one variety that does have some refined sugar in it. But other than that, and then one of the recipes, one of the books that is on the list is this one. I'm hoping you can see this, but if you can't read the title, it's the Whole Food Cooking Every Day. And 2 of my recipes for this luncheon come from this book, which I love. But it would be a lentil pate made with red lentils, and it has garlic in it, and it's very simple to cook. But it makes a nice kind of heavy dip that you could use for the crackers, or just avocado mashed up with a little bit of lemon juice, or hummus. So, or all three could make just a wonderful appetizer.
You know, another one I like to do is a cashew butter where you grind up cashews in your queeze with garlic and parsley and mind salt or herby salts, and then use that with like big slices of those mini peppers.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Really
that sounds
crunchy and
wonderful.
kind of
That
sweet
sounds
and a little
wonderful.
pungent. And that's something, I mean, my grandkids will eat that, but I love that.
Yeah. it sounds
Another one I
great.
really like is toasted. I do a nut mix. Walnuts, pecans, and peanuts are all supposed to be really good for your brain as you age.
Yes.
So I toss those with a little avocado oil, and then you can mix together, like I do chili powder, garlic, cumin, and that kind of stuff, or you could do coriander and curry powder and blah, blah, blah. And you toss that with the nuts and then you toast them for like 8 minutes at 350 and stir them up and do it about another 8 minutes. And then they're crisp and just amazing, but that's a good wholesome snack. And you could have quarter cup of that, right? But that's a nice little appetizer too, because it's kind of crunchy munchy, right?
Absolutely. I have one similar to that uses cashews. So
But what do you do with them?
about the same. It has a lot of spices on it. So they're kind of almost sweet, spicy, but you use coconut sugar, not refined sugar, and some spices, and you toast them lightly. And they're wonderful. How about anybody in the audience? Do any of you have an appetizer that you think is particularly healthy that you enjoy making? Beth, I know you're quite a cook.
No, I don't have anything to add at this point. I just read a recipe. It did include some cheese, Manchego cheese, but it was Marcona almonds and Castelvetrano olives cut off the pit and just mixed in a bowl.
Oh,
I haven't tried it yet, but that sounds so good to me. And then tiny cubes of Manchego, but I'm sure you could just have the nuts and olives in it. It would be
Yeah.
delicious.
well, and I think a little bit of cheese, if you're comfortable with that, is just
Yeah.
fine too. Absolutely. So
Yeah.
that sounds delicious. Absolutely. Anybody else have a recipe that they want to share at this point? No? All right. So then should we move on to the appetizer?
Or I think we just did appetizer, but we can talk about
excuse me,
salads,
Oh, go
because
ahead.
I think
Yeah.
you and I both have that thing of at least 7 things in a salad, right?
That's right.
So do you want to talk a little about why that's such a great idea?
Absolutely. One of the things that help, first of all, I think everybody in this audience probably knows, but I'll just repeat, the gut and our microbiome is probably at the basis of all of our health, and certainly at the basis of some of the things that keep us from being healthy. So we want to take really good care of the bacteria that we carry around with us every day in our gut. And the best way to do that is to avoid white flour, white sugars, and then there are some other things that sometimes we can't avoid, like antibiotics. Sometimes they're really important. You do need them, and some other medications. So when that time arises, if you do have an infection and you need antibiotics, I think it's even more important then to try to feed your gut the kinds of things that will help it to take care of itself while it's being assaulted by this other agent. But the thing about the 7 ingredients is it's a challenge. And you could certainly put more things in your salad, but the more different kinds of fiber you eat, the more different kinds of beneficial bacteria you're feeding in your microbiome, in your gut. And that makes a big difference. And it's really kind of fun. There's someone I know who uses it as, it sounds like, a conversation starter at dinner parties. So from what I've heard. So I think that sometimes it can be a really fun way to get people talking about health and nutrition without really making anyone feel uncomfortable. And it's why I started adding collard greens and mustard greens, dandelion greens. First of all, they're available to us. I'm hoping that this summer I'll be able to grow some of that, but I'm kind of amazed how much I'm enjoying all those other different kinds of things in my salad. And then what else would you put in, Ann?
Well, I always do 2 or 3 kinds of kale, and I grow Italian dandelion greens, which are upright. Interestingly, American dandelions, because of 300 years of mowing, have actually bred to be flat.
What?
But in Europe, they're still upright, and they're grown especially for gardens and gardening, and for vegetables gardeners, they're upright dandelion greens. And they're beautiful. They're tender and really delicious, but they have that little bit of bite that I think is it's sort of like a little bit of bitters that's so good for you.
They
So
do.
I like to put that in. And then I like to always I put in a lot of like a crisp apple chopped up, or in season, I would put in a handful of blueberries or even raspberries. Some of those fruits that can go either way, like stone some pie cherries, which are a little quite tart, and chop those in. Because I like that little bit of fruit too. And then I'd probably throw in a handful of cilantro, because that's another thing that I think of sort of tonic, right? Green onions or some red onion. If you don't have problems eating those, I like to put that in a salad too. And then of course, like toasted pumpkin seeds or a handful of those spicy nuts. So you've got some crunch, some sweet, some spicy, some sharp, a little bit of bitter. There's that Chinese old saying, can you eat bitter? Like, to be really strong, you need to be able to eat bitter. And I think the only bitter thing that Americans really go for is coffee, and they usually put cream and sugar in it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've seen more of a shift in the nutrition things that I'm looking at and listening to all the time, that bitters are becoming more used more often again, because they do help. And in a salad, well, arugula, I don't know if you mentioned that. Wouldn't that be kind of bitter?
A little, yeah, but as
Yes.
you say, if it's slivered up fine, then it's piquant. It's kind of a
Oh.
nice little balance point, right?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I've gotten used to, and actually kind of crave, is that the arugula flavor, and it's so easy to grow. I really love that, because it's
Yeah.
one thing that I've been very successful growing right out on the deck. In fact, it's still growing, and now we're going into spring again. So from last year.
It's actually a cool season crop that does best generally, like in Europe, they're planted in like September, October, November, and then they're grown through the winter. And that's
Yeah.
why they're so great right now, right?
Right, exactly. That and chard would be good, and chard seems to just winter over beautifully here. What else would I add to the salad? I'm less likely to add fruit, but I'll try that. Definitely seeds, always go into my salad, a variety of seeds. Pumpkin, sunflower, sometimes I'll toss in sesame seeds. They're really high in calcium, so good for our bones. Good for all of us, really. I think that's one thing I'm really beginning to understand about nutrition that I didn't quite get before. If you eat a really diverse diet with plenty of oils that are healthy oils, or healthy fats, like some things we'll talk about next, and a diverse diet, you don't have to worry about what's good for your heart or what's good for your gut or what's the best brain food, depending on what your particular concern is. I think if we eat a really diverse, wonderfully healthy diet, we take care of our whole body. And so that's kind of the approach I'm trying to take for myself. So what would
Yeah,
you do?
that's
with
really
salad
wise.
dressing? Yeah.
Because I think we've talked about this before, that the average American eats like 4 vegetables, and one of them is ketchup, right? And the little bit of lettuce that gets put in a sandwich. And, a lot of people really literally don't eat vegetables. People in my own family, I have learned to smuggle them into all kinds of things by cutting them small, and not, making it very obvious that they're there. But I think the diversity idea, it's like diversity is good for us about everything. It's the diversity of ideas, of personalities, of character, of people, but definitely of flavors too. And there's an interesting study that I remember, that the last thing you eat stays with you. And so if the last thing you eat is sweet, you're going to end up craving more sweet things all through the day. But if the last thing you eat is savory, then you'll be more leaning into the savory for the rest of the day. So I think about that, like at breakfast, people sometimes have a Danish or something like that. It sets you up for kind of a bad day. But if you're eating something that's more on the spicy side, that gives you a whole different take on the day, right?
Yeah, I think that's really true. Absolutely.
I was going to ask you about, I do this little salad seed mix, and I toast them. It's like whole pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds, black and golden sesame seeds, but I like flax seeds in there too.
Mhm.
Do you do that? Do you use those?
I don't necessarily use them in my salad, although I suppose I could, but I use them ground up in the smoothie I have for breakfast most mornings. So I do get flaxseed pretty much every day. I sometimes have flax oil on hand, which I'll put in my salad dressings, but it it can get rancid pretty quickly, and so I don't always have it. But yeah, I like flax seeds. I don't usually toast my seeds. I think when I do that, it's a real treat, but I eat them raw. It's easier. It's, and I think actually we get just a smidgen more nutrients that way. But I think that's not enough to worry about. I wouldn't stop toasting them. So what about the entree for your meal would be dinner or lunch or either?
Either, but actually I wanted to ask you a little bit about dressing before we leave salad.
Oh, all right.
Because my son makes his dressing. I think I told you about this.
Mhm.
It's like a third of a cup of avocado oil, a couple tablespoons of fruit vinegar, or vinegar, and several tablespoons of nutritional yeast, that flaked yeast, which has a kind of cheesy, nutty quality, and just a little dash of maple syrup. And it's so good on almost everything. It's good on steamed vegetables. It's good even on fish or, chicken or something like that, but it's incredible on salad dressing. But you mentioned you have some dressings that you like too.
I do. I have a really standard vinaigrette that I make. But I also lately have been really enjoying a creamy tahini dressing. That's tahini and lemon juice. I add a little bit of apple cider vinegar because I'm beginning to really believe it's really good for us. It can have maple syrup, but I don't usually add that because I don't feel it needs the sweetness. And what else is in it? Oh, and then some oils. And I usually add a mix of olive oil and flax oil if I have it. And it makes a wonderful creamy, a little water to make it really creamy, makes a great salad dressing. And it's loaded with good things.
That sounds like it would be good over steamed vegetables or something like
Mhm.
that too.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. With something that goes into that tahini spicy, you wouldn't need the sweetness at all.
No. The other thing I will add is I often will sprinkle the nutritional yeast just on top of the salad. And then I'll put that dressing on, but then I'll sprinkle it with a little nutritional yeast, which adds a very interesting flavor and lots of good things for us. So yeah.
One nice thing about the nutritional yeast is it has almost a salty quality, even though it does not have salt in it. And so for
Right.
people who are trying to taper the salt intake, that's a really nice way to kind of wean off the
Mhm.
super salty flavor.
Right. I think you're right. It does have a little bit of a salty taste and it's an interesting flavor. I like the addition. It's almost cheesy. So yeah, it's a nice addition.
At one point, my granddaughter had several allergy issues and she couldn't have dairy and she couldn't have gluten. And so we were doing gluten-free pasta and she wanted mac and cheese like her brother had. And I would do avocado oil with nutritional yeast and a little of one of the herb salts I make, like a rosemary ginger herb salt or basil herb salt, something like that. And then actually that tastes so rich and yummy that we call them granny noodles, but it's like a mac and cheese for people who can't do cheese.
Yeah, no, I think it really does fill in that taste, the flavor that people need. Yeah, and it's a nice, healthy, full of nutrition addition. Yeah, that's why it's called nutritional yeast, huh?
Yeah, and it has a lot of protein, which is
Mhm,
another
it
thing.
does.
And that, seeds too, like I don't think we mentioned that, but that seeds are very high in protein because they're the building blocks of a plant, right? They've got
Right,
everything they
exactly.
need in them to make a new plant, and that makes them really rich in protein. So people who also are trying to get a little more protein in their day, which is important for seniors, if you don't eat meat, or you don't eat much meat, that's a really good place to make sure that you are getting good complex proteins too.
Right. The other seed I wanted to mention, you made me think of it, is hemp seeds.
Oh yeah.
That you can purchase and they're easy to store. They're loaded with protein, but they're also loaded with omega-3s and some omega-6s. And so in a good balance. And so they're good for good brain food. We need those fats, those healthy fats, and they're loaded with protein. Yeah. And I think if you eat a really diverse vegetable diet, you are getting proteins from other sources. So that's just one more thing that the seeds add that. Yes.
Oh, yeah. And people around the world don't eat meat like we do. I mean, if meat appears at all, it's like a condiment almost.
Right.
And yet people have lived for millennia without it, without being. And it's been really interesting. I think I talked to you about this, that some researchers recently found traces of what they think is the first cooked meal that they've been able to do genetic work on, and it's 70,000 years old. And
Wow.
it's ground up lentils and wild grains made into a kind of bread with herbs and wild mustard. Is
Oh
that
my
so
God.
cool? And
Yeah,
so
it
they
is.
decided to try to make a little recipe for it, and and make little, like cakes that you would bake on a hot stone, right?
Mhm.
But I think that's just such an interesting thing, that we've been eating this mixtures of different kinds of grains and pulses and, seeds and nuts and so forth. And that is really what our bodies were developed to use. And the idea that our Paleolithic ancestors were entirely meat eating is just not right at all.
No, I think that's a legend somebody developed for sure. And it's just like the fear of fats that was developed, and I think plays a role in the poor health that my generation and some others, have begun to really see, is that fats are health. Now we know fats are good for us if they're the right fats. Now I'm not saying too much oil or fats, but we know now that our brains really need fat. Things like avocados and nuts and seeds and the things that our ancestors also ate. Although my ancestors weren't in California or Mexico, so I don't know if they ever had access to avocados, but that the healthy fats like you're talking about in the nuts and seeds, and healthy protein in quinoa is loaded with protein. It's a grain that's really good for us too. And it's actually not a grain. I think it's a seed.
It is a seed, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one that you have to wash because it has that slightly soapy coating.
Right.
So rinsing that one is pretty important, like rinsing some of the rices too.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think the thing that's awesome about fat for cooks is that fat carries flavor.
Mhm.
And so in those entirely fat-free meals, in order to make them palatable, they start putting sugary stuff in,
Right.
because without any oil, there's not much flavor base.
No, I think
It's
you're
really
right.
interesting how, you can make something that almost tastes good, and then you put just a little this or a little that, and it picks it right up. The right fat is definitely one of those things.
And you don't need a lot of it. You use just a small amount to get things kick-started. So especially, should we move on to now?
Yeah.
Have we covered salads enough? Anybody else out there have anything to add to the salad conversation?
Or
Well, I was
question.
wondering about balsamic vinegar. It's a sweet vinegar with an oil, avocado or olive oil. We often put that on salads.
Yeah, no, I think that would be delicious. I think balsamic vinegar adds a very great flavor. And there's another vinegar that I use sometime when I'm cooking greens, and it's umi plum vinegar.
Mm.
And it has a tart sweet sort of flavor. And it's just a perfect dressing to put a little bit on greens that I have steamed lightly with garlic or something. So, and balsamic vinegar would work well in that presentation as well, I think.
Yeah.
When I was working with Junko Harui, he said his mom, if they had a cold or flu or anything like that, she would make umeboshi, which is ume vinegar on a little plain rice with green tea. And that made a kind of soup. And
Yeah.
that's what it's like, it'd be the Japanese version of chicken soup for a bad cold.
Right.
Which I thought
Yeah.
was so interesting.
They-
The only vinegar I know of that's not really very good is like that plain white vinegar that you use for like cleaning your windows. That stuff's harsh. It'll take paint
Yeah.
off, so you want to make sure there's vinegars that are actually developed to kill plants.
Right. But if you
Horticulture vinegars.
Yeah, if you think about that white vinegar, it's had all the goodness taken out of it by somehow refining it. And that is the problem with so many foods. I mean, cane sugar comes from sugar cane. There probably actually are some really nutritional parts of the sugar cane, but they take everything good out of it. And so it has no minerals, it has no vitamins, it has nothing that that helps our body. So yeah, the umi plum vinegar and most vinegars are somewhat fermented, right? That's what
Yes,
makes
all of them.
vinegar.
Yes.
So they're really good for our microbiome, as all fermented foods are. Good for us. So
One of my friends likes to say that whiskey is fermented true, which is true.
Yeah.
yes, it is true.
But
Oh.
I'm not sure it would be right up there in the top choice.
Right. Chris, do you have a
Chris?
question?
Yeah, I was just going to share
Yeah.
a friend of ours from Colombia, Inez, has had a really nice salad we'd have for lunch, which for those people who would eat smoked salmon would be over 2 types of lettuce with mango, kiwi, strawberries, olives, green olives, and then just apple cider vinegar and a little bit of olive oil. Nothing else. You didn't have to add any dill or any kinds of spices to that. And that alone is a very, very fresh and with the mixture of the sweet and the salty and the greens and the non-greens. So it's very colorful salad. So that's always been fun. Oh, and I said mango. Mango was in there as well.
Yeah. You know, and rice vinegar, you can buy plain rice vinegar, but the usual kind actually has salt and sugar in it. So you want to be sure if you're going to use rice vinegar, you pick the one that doesn't have all that stuff. And then you can put, if you want to have a little presence of some sweetness, you might put some berries in, or you might use the nutritional yeast, or I put a little bit of salt in. I know I've talked to Suzanne about, I use mined salt rather than sea salt anymore, because it turns out there's so much plastic in sea salt now that it's actually, you know, accumulating in our bodies. And the mined salts, like the Morton kosher salt, it doesn't have plastic in it. I think that's sad, but
Yeah, I think it's sad too, but at least we have an option for sure for salt. So, so then let's move on now. We've covered salads, I think. And do you want to talk about what would you do for the main part of your meal? And then we need to have enough time to get into the treat part that we actually advertised at the beginning of this conversation.
so I personally think every single thing we've talked about is a huge treat, but
I agree. I agree.
I'd say a couple different entrees I make often. One would be poached salmon in lemon juice, just fresh squeezed lemon juice. And I dip the fish in it, both sides, and then poach it about 10 minutes per inch of thickness. And then I top that before it even cooks with minced garlic and parsley, a little bit of salt and fresh pepper. And make sure it gets up to 145 degrees and take it right off the heat. And that is just a beautiful, like soft, fragrant piece of fish that's really wholesome and very, it does have fat from the skin, but the skin will slip right off and stay in the pan. And you'll get enough of the beneficial oils from what's the fish without having to eat the skin, which I think is actually gross. And then the other one I would do is delicata squash, those long stripy ones. They're so tender that if you just cut the stem end off and cut them in half and scoop out the seeds, you can bake them cut side down. Again, a little bit of avocado oil at like 350 or 400 till they're soft. Flip them over, and then I stuff them with a little goat cheese, chopped up sweet peppers, chopped up walnuts, minced garlic and rosemary, or a little onion, maybe a little bit of chili pepper, and then heat them until they just warm it up. Right. But that is just so yummy. And then you can actually mash the whole thing together and then eat it because you can eat the skin when they're crispy like that.
Absolutely. That
It's
sounds
so
yummy.
good.
Yeah.
And
if
you're going to have like a little love fest, drippy finger food is probably perfect, right? Because you're like, right? Puts you in the mood. What would you use?
Well, so the meal that I was thinking about was a little bit different, because this would be a luncheon for friends, a gathering. And so I have actually now 2 bright orange soup recipes that I bounce back and forth with. And one of them I know Chris and David cook quite a lot. And and they've made a wonderful addition to it. The bright orange soup is a simple thing to make. The chopping up, getting prepared for takes some time, but it's quick to cook. It freezes beautifully. And so I have some in the freezer right now that I'll probably have for dinner tonight. And you could either do it, the recipe that I'm sharing today is also in this book. But it's really garlic and onion sauteed in some coconut oil, small amount. And then you throw in chopped up root vegetables. So I use sweet potatoes, parsnips, definitely. You could use rutabaga, carrots. The sweet potatoes I use are usually the bright reddish orange ones. So the soup is this beautiful color. Because of all those foods, the sweet potatoes, the carrots, the parsnips, it's very deliciously sweet. I mean, I think any child would eat it because it's bright colored and it's delicious in flavor. This variation that is in the Amy Chaplin book, she has all kinds of variations that you can add to that. You could add coriander, just some dill would make it good. I cook mine with bay leaves in it because we have a little bay tree on the deck. But it's wonderful and it freezes nicely and it's very soothing. It's a very comfortable meal, loaded with vitamins, loaded with phytonutrients, and loaded with fiber. So that would be the main course for my Valentine's Day luncheon.
That sounds yummy. And immediately you can see, you could take that in so many directions, right?
Absolutely.
Like put some peanuts in and make it like that African peanut soup.
Oh, you could go any direction with it. And if anybody there who doesn't already have my recipe for the carrot ginger soup, which is just a variation of what I just said, just send me an email and I'm happy to send it out to you. So it isn't that one. I don't have a resource to share. I've had the recipe it came from a yoga journal. Oh boy, probably 20 years ago. So I don't know who the actual designer of the recipe is, but I do add a parsnip to that one now too, thanks to Chris and David. So there you go. So that would be my course.
Soup recipes are kind of like folk songs. They shift over time and they belong to you, and you make it your own by saying, oh, and I always have to put some cilantro in there or whatever, and they morph along with the time. So it's yours. It's your soup now. Right?
It's my soup. Well, it seems to be my soup now because there are plenty of people I've shared the recipe with. And it is something I oftentimes will serve if I'm having somebody over for just a light lunch. It's just a perfect thing to have. And for me, it's a wonderful dinner many nights. And tonight will be a night like that I'll just have that soup probably for dinner and that'll be it. And it's enough. It's plenty.
Which sounds great. But let's talk treats.
All right. Should I start?
Yeah, you start.
Right. I have 2 recipes for treats that I want to share because, and I am, those of you who know me, I'm a chocolate fan for sure. And so first of all, because I don't eat sugar, I wanted to share these 2. This is the chocolate bar, the Hoon, that I really love. And they do put them on sale at T&C from time to time. But if you just want to get a little bit of chocolate, this is the way to go. It's 3 ingredients. It's all it is organic chocolate, organic coconut sugar, and then organic chocolate butter, cocoa butter. And then they're delicious and they're really relatively healthy. I would say you don't want to eat chocolate all the time. I mean, I'd love to, but I try to make it be a treat. So that's the chocolate bar I like. And that same company now makes a baking chocolate in a package that looks like this. And T&C has them both. And so when I melt chocolate, I'm usually now using this chocolate. So it has no cane sugar in it. So the first recipe is really simple. And it came from Simple Vegan blog. And this one I've had several years. And then I have made variations to it. And that blog is on the how to get to the blog is on the reference sheet, the resources. But the ingredients are dates, which and I like the big ones. Is it medjool? Am I saying
Yeah.
Medjool, thank you. Okay. I like those big ones that are nice and soft. You take the pit out. They're loaded with minerals, vitamins, and loads of fiber. I think I read somewhere that one date has 22 grams of fiber in it. Now, don't quote me on that, but they're loaded with good fiber. And they're nice and sweet, but in its kind of sweetness, because there's all that fiber, you digest the sugar part of this whole little dessert more slowly. So it doesn't give you that blood sugar spike. So dates, almond butter, or I sometimes use peanut butter. So either one. You also need some dark chocolate that you've chopped up and melted. And then the fourth ingredient you don't need much of, or you can leave out completely, is a little bit of coconut oil to melt into the chocolate to make it a little smoother. And so you cut the dates, take the pit out, put some wonderful almond butter or peanut butter in there. The Amy Chaplin book tells you just how to make the most delicious almond butter at home. So you could do that. So you put a little smear of that in, and then you pour the melted chocolate over it. And then, and we usually, I put a little sprinkle of sea salt, but now I'll have to start using kosher salt. So I'll do that, just a little bit of that salt chocolate thing. And then I put them on a tray and I put them in the freezer. And they don't take very long to freeze. And you serve them, usually I'll cut them then in half so they look like little bonbons. And you serve them straight out of the freezer, and they're, oh my goodness, they're just wonderful. Just a perfect treat, full of nutrition.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
I know, and easy to do. And you could vary it. You could put any kind of little stuff in you. I mean, I could see that blueberries tucked in there that have been softened, thawed and then tucked in might be good.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have a chocolate pudding that I developed for Harmony Hill Cancer Retreat. And it's really a funny recipe because if you just give it to somebody, they'll eat it and say it's delicious. But if you tell them what it is, they won't even try it.
That's right. I bet
So
it's similar to mine.
it might
Yeah.
well be. It's like the firm, silky tofu. Is that
Oh.
what
Uh-huh.
and dark chocolate, dark cocoa powder, the kind that doesn't have any sugar in it. It's baking cocoa powder, right?
Real cocoa.
Real cocoa. And then a little vanilla and a little bit of sea salt and just enough maple syrup to take, you don't need very much, just enough to be the balance point. So a few tablespoons even. And then you squeeze it, you grind it, you puree it or use your stick blender or something, and then chill it. And it's so good. It really is. And as long as nobody knows what it is, they will eat it all day long. And it actually is almost kind of sort of healthy.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, mine is very similar, but not similar. And I see that we're almost out of time. So can I jump in and just?
Yeah, please do. I was going to say you got another one coming.
Yeah, mine's a variation for sure. So mine is Mexican chocolate pudding. And does anyone out there have an idea what might be the main ingredient? It isn't tofu. No. All right. So, and it's the same kind of thing. If you were to tell someone that this is what this was, they wouldn't eat it. So the main ingredient, it's made with avocado as the main ingredient. So loaded with healthy fats and fiber. And then it has almond milk, or you could use any other kind of milk. I mean, if you eat dairy, you could certainly use real milk. But almond milk, a little maple syrup, cacao powder, and some cinnamon, cayenne pepper, and vanilla. And the recipe, I'll share in a minute where it comes from, but it's delicious. The only thing I will say is be very careful. They recommend an 1/8 to 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper. And the cinnamon and the cayenne pepper are what make it Mexican chocolate, but go easy on the cayenne pepper.
Yeah.
Because pretty quickly, it can be too much. And then you don't really taste the wonderful chocolate. But it's loaded with nutrition. And like I said, most people never even guess that it's not a regular pudding.
Wow, that sounds, I'm going to definitely try that.
Yeah. So, and let me show you where that book, it's on the resource list, but that recipe is in this book. And this is one of those, this book is from the library, and I promise I'll return it very quickly. Maybe they have 2 copies, I don't know, but it is loaded with great recipes. I check it out every once in a while and go through it again. So can you read it? But it'll be on the resource list too.
Yeah.
So it's called Whole Bowls at the bottom, and the person whose recipe it is Allison Day. But it's an easy thing to make. You throw all those things in the Cuisinart, blend them together, and then put them in the fridge and get it cold.
I'm definitely going to give that one a shot. But, we started a little late, so I think we can run over just long enough to get your recipe for hot chocolate that you talked about.
Oh, the hot chocolate recipe. Well, the hot chocolate recipe has lots of adaptogens in it. It's made with cacao, and it has lots of adaptogens in it. And I don't have the recipe in front of me, but it's also, again, it's this cookbook author. Her name is Amy Chaplin, and it's not in this book, but it's on Food 52. So, which is a website that has loads of recipes. And she has several really wonderful recipes there for other things, but it's a hot chocolate with lots of adaptogens. So it's calming, it's good for you, and it's made with cacao and almond milk and some other things. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. Well, Suzanne, this is great. And I think we do need to talk again about things like what kind of bacteria live in your armpits and what kinds of vinegars are the best for you and how to make vinegar with no sugar and things like that. Would that be fun?
Yeah, it would be fun. I'm not sure that I'll be able to figure out exactly or pronounce the names of the bacteria that live in your armpits, but you're right. Microbiome is all over us, inside and out. We're just this walking superorganism that we need to take good care of. You're right.